Warm and friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSiN family podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as it's another conference preview edition of Coast to Coast Hoops. We are going into the Atlantic Sun today. This man has joined me for at the very least 6 years to preview this conference. Blake Lovell, he does such great work over at Southeastern 16. Based out there in Nashville, Tennessee, one of the few cities that still has an Atlantic Sun team because there's been lots of realignment here in the offseason. He's going to join me in segment number 2. We are now down to 8 members. We're going to look at all 8 rosters, the coaching changes, the nooks and crannies of this conference. Blake always delivers on that front. It's going to be a lot of fun to chat it up with him in segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, we're going to take a look at the betting trends and the styles of play that we can expect here in the Atlantic Sun. And then in the final segment, I'm going to get you guys my projector or finish for the Atlantic Sun. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I do beg of you, I do plead with you, please do send in those Twitter/X questions. It helps the season go by a little bit faster. I'll address those when I'm not doing conference previews, because when it comes to these conference preview podcasts, whether you're listening in June, July, August, September, I want you to get good information for the upcoming season. I want to keep these as evergreen as humanly possible and give as much sparkle and shine to these conferences as humanly possible. And how about if we do dive in and take a look at an Atlantic Sun where defense, it looks like it's going to be very optional in this conference for the upcoming season. Now, you've got your newest Division I member in this conference as well. That would be West Florida. They join as they are the Argonauts, I believe that they are. That's a great mascot, and they joined because they needed another new member. They went 25-9 at the Division II level. They were averaging 85 points per game, shot 38.5% from three-point range, but they really only returned 3 key members from that team from a season ago, but they'll fit in very well in this conference because you saw some of the worst defenses in all of college basketball in this conference. As a matter of fact, you had 365 Division I teams in all of college basketball last season. Bottom 2 teams in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis were based here. Bellarmine, dead last, 365th out of 365 Division I teams in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. North Florida, 364th, and then you've got Stetson checking in 346th in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Queens NC, they were 344th in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Jacksonville was a little bit better, but they were still hovering right around about 318th. Lipscomb was really your team that stepped it up on defense. A whopping 213th in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Yay, barely there. Florida Gulf Coast, they were checking in 241st in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. So, as you can imagine, a lot of teams that weren't playing a lot of defense, and this is a conference where a lot of teams love to just chuck it up from three-point range. For North Florida, they're always one of those creme de la creme teams. They were 7th in the country in terms of percentage of their field goal attempts that came from three-point range. They attempted 51.7% of their field goal attempts from three-point range, so they were not afraid to let it fly. Lipscomb, 24th in the country. They took 47.9% of their field goal attempts from three-point range. You have a little bit of a fall off there. Stetson, they were still 75th in the country with regards to percentage of their field goal attempts that came from three-point range, and Jacksonville is one of the few teams that really doesn't attempt as many threes. Under Coach Jordan Mincy, they were about 223rd last season in terms of percentage of field goal attempts that come from three-point range. Bellarmine, closer to country average, 145th. Same goes for Florida Gulf Coast, 202nd in the country in terms of field goal attempts that come from three. And getting back to Bellarmine, they were absolutely awful on defense, as I mentioned, 365th out of 365 teams in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. How about the offense that they were able to provide, though? They were 21st in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, so they were really able to get things cooking there, probably a beneficiary of some of these teams not being so great on defense, and they were one of the few good offenses in this conference. Jacksonville was 222nd in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Stetson, they were 227th in terms of points per possession, though North Florida took a bunch of threes, only 207th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Florida Gulf Coast, they were more around about 159th, and they were one of the more befuddling teams in the conference. Lipscomb 129th in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Queens NC, they were a really dominant home offense. They were overall 31st in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Only Arkansas scored more points on a per possession basis at home. Obviously, you're going to have some mixing and some shaking there, and it's very interesting with regards to the styles that you were able to find in this conference as well, because Queens NC is traditionally one of the faster teams in all of college basketball. They actually were down a little bit with regards to their tempo from a few seasons ago, but they're still really fast, 67th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Have a team like a Lipscomb who was pretty fast as well, 102nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and North Florida always loves to come at 33rd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. But then you get down to some of these teams that they just don't really like to push the tempo too much. Stetson, they were actually up from where they were a few seasons ago when they made the NCAA tournament, down to about 240th in terms of total possessions per game. Jacksonville is always a team that looks to play very slow, very controlled. They were 332nd in terms of total possessions per game. The slug in the conference. Bellarmine is traditionally a really slow team as well, 312th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. You've got a nice mix of styles there, and then for Florida Gulf Coast, they just do whatever the heck they feel like on that given year. Last year, they were 103rd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Season before that, they were well outside the top 250, so they're a little bit of a yo-yoing sort of team. And you take a look at some of the betting trends that you got in this conference, and you've got some conferences that play very much to the over, some conferences that play very much to the under. I don't think that this is going to come as a shocker to a lot of people. The Atlantic Sun saw quite a few overs last season. Now, Jacksonville, I mentioned, slowest team in the conference, 12 overs to 18 unders last season, but Bellarmine, 20 overs to 10 unders. Queens NC, 22 unders to 12 unders. Now, you've got a few defunct teams that they were really good over teams as well. North Florida, Florida Gulf Coast, they were more 50-50 teams. 14 overs to 15 unders for North Florida, Florida Gulf Coast, 15 overs to 17 unders. Obviously, West Florida is not going to have any betting trends. They were at the Division II level. You don't get betting trends for Division II teams, but outside Lipscomb, 15 overs to 15 unders last season, and I think that's really interesting to take a look at the dynamic between conference games versus non-conference games, because a lot of the returning schools were actually not too bad to the under in terms of conference games. In conference play and conference play only, Lipscomb 9 overs to 10 unders, Jacksonville 8 overs to 11 unders, same goes for North Florida, and then Florida Gulf Coast 7 overs to 14 unders. I had Bellarmine 14 overs to 6 unders in conference play, and Queens NC 12 overs to 9 unders as well, and then Stetson 50-50, 10 overs, 10 unders for themselves as well, but certainly an interesting dynamic there. And out there in the Atlantic Sun, you're not going to get a lot of inclement travel, shall we say, because you've got most of your teams out there in the state of Florida and in the state of Tennessee. Was a little bit more spread out before, where you had like West Georgia, obviously out there in the state of Georgia. You've got a few teams out there in Alabama, but the travel is very much cut down. And the team that really dominated the conference last year, West Georgia, was 21-9 against the spread last season. Central Arkansas, they were 19-10-3 against the spread. Those are two teams that are now off the board. You got a lot of the teams that were struggling a little bit against the spread remaining in this conference. Florida Gulf Coast was one of your least profitable teams in all of college basketball. How about 9-22-1 against the spread? Only Rider and Kansas City, UMKC, had worse overall cover rates in all of college basketball last season. You got Jacksonville back 12-18 against the spread. Even though Queens NC made the NCAA tournament, 14-19-1 against the spread. Lipscomb was 14-16 against the spread. Stetson, they were a solid team, 18-13 against the spread. North Florida, 17-12 against the spread, and then Bellarmine 17-12-1 against the spread themselves. And if you look at the way that these teams were able to perform on the road, it was just really brutal for these teams. Even though you don't have a ton of travel, home court advantage was big in this conference. Among the teams that were returning from a season ago, only North Florida was above 50% with their cover rate away from home, 9-7 against the spread away from home. Now you've got a few teams that were 50-50. Stetson 8-8 against the spread away from home. Bellarmine 7-7-1 against the spread away from home. But Florida Gulf Coast 3-10-1 against the spread away from home. Queens NC 4-11-1 against the spread away from home. Jacksonville 7-10 against the spread away from home. Same goes for Lipscomb as well. And these were teams that they just weren't able to do the world's greatest job in the role of a favorite as well. Stetson, they were 2-0 against the spread as a favorite. They were the lone team that returns from a season ago that had a cover rate above 50% as a favorite. As for North Alabama, by the way, they are no longer in the conference, but they were 0-7 against the spread as a favorite. But Florida Gulf Coast, 5-15 against the spread as a favorite. Jacksonville, 4-7 against the spread as a favorite. Bellarmine, 3-5 against the spread as a favorite. Lipscomb, 8-11 against the spread as a favorite. Just goes back to the fact that because these teams played no defense whatsoever, these underdogs were able to weasel their way back into these games, be able to cover some spreads, and because you've got higher scoring games, you're typically going to get higher point spreads as well. Like, you take a look at the record for these teams as an underdog, Bellarmine 14-7-1 against the spread as an underdog. North Florida 17-12 against the spread as an underdog. Stetson 16-12 against the spread as an underdog. Lipscomb 6-5 against the spread as an underdog. Florida Gulf Coast just didn't cover games. 4-7-1 against the spread as a favorite. Queens NC 4-8-1 against the spread as a underdog, and then Jacksonville, they were 8-10 themselves, but lots of struggles for these road teams, lots of struggles for these favorites. So going to be a lot of fun to take a look at this conference. We're going to take a look at all 8 rosters, some of the coaching moves, and some of the nooks and crannies of the Atlantic Sun with our good friend Blake Lovell on the flip side, right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VC Family Podcast, the Atlantic Sun Conference Preview Edition. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. This is the Atlantic Sun Conference Preview Edition, and this man has joined me for, at the very minimum, 7 Atlantic Sun Conference previews. It might be 8, it might be 9. This man every single year delivers the goods on this podcast. He's over there at Southeastern 16, doing a great job there, but really covers the entire landscape of college basketball. Blake Lovell is my guest. He's based out there in the lovely city of Nashville, just doing amazing work in general in this great sport of college basketball. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell. Last name is spelled Lovell. And Blake, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's always for having me, Greg.
Thank you for joining me, Blake. And Blake, you know that this is a different Atlantic Sun preview because this is going to be the shortest one that we've ever done. We've only got 8 teams out here. And how about if we look at first things first, a school in West Florida? They were good at the Division II level last year. They are the newest Division I member. They were 25-9 last year. They were shooting as a collective about 38.5% from 3, averaging over 80 points per game, but very little returning from last year. As we know, with a lot of these Division II teams, when they step up to the Division I level, the size is typically a little bit too much for them, and I just think that this is going to be rough for a West Florida team that, unless if I'm missing something, they're really bringing in no Division I transfers to make the transition.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, if you want to be optimistic, it would be, it's certainly a different looking conference than it would have been last year. Again, they only have 8 teams, so you're competing against 7 other teams, and we're going to talk about a couple of them that I think are going to be have a chance to be pretty good. But I think overall, it is one where it's like you're kind of making this transition. We always say sometimes you can find a couple of those teams where you're just like, all right, everything seems to be there on paper for these teams to make that jump, and all of a sudden, based on their conference, they have a chance to be successful. I think this is, again, one where there's just not a lot of other options. It's an 8-team conference we're working with here, but I think overall, like you said, you start to compare rosters, which is really all you can do when it comes to, this small of a conference. Yes, it does feel like it may take another year for the West Florida team here to maybe get closer to the top of the standings.
How about if we stay in the state of Florida, another directional Florida team of North Florida. As we know, with the mighty Osprey, they are never shy to take threes. They're always one of those teams that ranks in the top 10, top 15 in terms of percentage of the field goal attempts that come from three-point range under a new guidance because, as we know, no longer do you have Matthew Driscoll. He was over at Kansas State last season. They maintain the same style, and they bring back quite a bit from last season. Kent Jackson, a double-figure scorer. B.J. Plummer was a guy that was a mixer and shaker. Mason Lee as well. I just flat out don't know if they have the talent, though, even with a lot of camaraderie, to really rise up too much in the conference, though.
Yeah, we used to talk about with them off season. We kind of say, their defense has to get better. And, last year the defense didn't really get better. They were 363 in adjusted defensive efficiency, which I think was lower, I would have to believe, than any number they had in the Matthew Driscoll era there. And so, that's the thing. Like you said, the tempo didn't really change in terms of, still played a pretty fast tempo under Bobby Kinnan there. But, the offensive numbers just at times, they were fine, I guess decent. But when you're giving up that many points and you kind of have those defensive efficiency numbers, you're not turning people over, you're bad on the glass, those kind of things. Like you said, you do have some retention there. So maybe it's just a matter of development and that kind of stuff. But overall, I mean, 7-win team last year. Yes, that they brought in some new players, but you're kind of banking on developing some of these guys and hoping that can be a big difference maker this year. But I just don't know how drastic of a jump you can make when, again, there's pretty glaring, obvious weaknesses, especially, like we said, on the defensive end with this team last year.
And I feel like we're going to be saying that about a lot of these teams, Blake, as we have Blake Lovell, who does such a great job over at Southeastern 16, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I like Donnie Jones as a coach. He's been at Stetson for quite a while, got them to the NCAA tournament a few seasons ago. As we know, this was another team that was in the bottom 30 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Good news is you bring back Colin Cole, who was able to give you 6.3 rebounds per game. Alec Oglesby, welcome back. I have no idea how he has eligibility remaining because he already spent 2 years at Stetson. He was over at Middle Tennessee last year, but last he was at Stetson. He was shooting over 40% from three for them. Daniel McGregor is able to dole it out. I feel like there's some nice pieces here, but again, can this team play a lick of defense whatsoever?
Yeah, and that hasn't really changed, like you said, over the past couple seasons when you look at it, because, that team that made the NCAA tournament several years ago now, they weren't a great defensive team, but the one thing that separated them was that they were just outstanding on the offensive end a lot of the time. And that's where, you do look at some of the stats, and they've just not been able to get back to that level these past couple of years, 20 wins overall combined the past 2 seasons. And so if they are going to make a jump, like you said, the defense has got to get better. And, even though there may be some of those things they can lean on, it is going to be a team, I think, that's still going to take a lot of threes. It's one where they just didn't have a lot of experience last year. And I think if you look at this group, at least there's a little more of that with some of the guys they're bringing in. Like you said, you got a guy basically you don't even know he has eligibility left in Oglesby. And so it is one where maybe it's just a more experienced team that helps them win a few more of those games, maybe that are close, down the stretch or whatever. But still, like you mentioned, it's just the defensive aspect and trying to figure out if they can get back to closer to being not necessarily a elite offensive team, but just simply an average offensive team. If they can get back to that standpoint, be maybe a little bit better than that, and let's say the defense stays the same and doesn't go backward, then yeah, they can certainly have a chance to, I think, compete. It's just, again, that's something that's got to be fixed.
Yep, it is certainly something that needs to be fixed. And I want to talk about a team that probably needs to fix their defense. How about if we go with Bellarmine? Out of 365 Division I teams, 365th in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. But boy, oh boy, the Davenport system always churns out good offense. They were a top 25 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. They bring back guys like Keenan Gooden, who was a double figure scorer. Tyler Doyle was able to dole out 4 assists per game. They bring back a lot of nice pieces from a season ago, though Jack Karzinski, that top scorer, is going to be out of the fold. And once again, it feels like the same thing we talked about Stetson. Great offense. What are we going to get defensively out of these guys, especially with Doug Davenport now in his second year after taking over the reins from his father, Scott Davenport?
Yeah, and I think, this is a team that, yes, it is very glaring, like you said, on the defensive end, literally the worst when it comes to just the efficiency numbers. Like, they were just flat out bad. Team shot 40% from 3 against them. That was 364th nationally. And it's just like, that probably can't happen, even if you are a great offensive team. That is the difference between 13 and 19, or flipping that into being a team that goes 19 and 13. You look at some of those games, again, that they lost. Like, I felt like North Florida was just a great example of that 117, 114 overtime game they played. Just having some high-scoring games like that. But retention is the story. You mentioned that, where, you're getting a couple double-digit scores back here. You have someone, like Donald averaged about 7. And so I think that is where anytime we do these previews, especially for these conferences like this, it is something where the retention, I feel like, could really be the biggest difference maker. And so you would hope you're not, the worst defensive team in the country. That would probably just, you can't go backwards at this point, Greg. You got to go forwards. And so even if you can get your offensive numbers pretty close, maybe they're not, top 10 in 2-point percentage and free throw percentage, and basically top 15 in 3-point percentage again. But with some of those guys coming back, you do have to pick up a little bit of that of Karzinski, like you said. But I still think overall there's at least some upside here, and a lot of it has to do with, like you mentioned, it is just a team that is known for its offensive sort of capabilities and how it runs its stuff. And so I'm willing to lean on a team like that, whereas some of these other teams we talked about, they've also been bad defensive teams, but have not been anywhere near as good on the offensive side.
And out there in the Atlantic Sun, we've got a lot of teams that they look to push tempo. Stetson, Bellarmine are two of the slowest teams, but they don't compare to Jacksonville. Under Coach Jordan Mincy, it feels like this is a team that tries to emphasize defense, but as we know, just because you play slow doesn't mean you play great defense. Jacksonville really lacked on defense last year, but they bring in Jamie Phillips from Stetson when he was out there because he dealt with injury, 16 points per game. Caleb Williams, no, not the quarterback of the Bears, comes in from Lafayette. Hayden Wood is coming back. Like, they're bringing in a lot of talent, but I do still have some question marks with this team because for Jacksonville, the system is to play slow and good defense, but the defense just flat out wasn't there last year.
Yeah, they've not really probably taken that jump that many people thought they would, or be able to keep that momentum going from even that first year when he came in. They won 21 games. I think they were 11-5 in the conference. A couple years, took a step back. They made that jump in 2025, but then last year, it's kind of another step back. And look, you could probably use that same template for a lot of mid-major, low-major schools because it's simply, can you keep all your players every offseason and that kind of thing? And it's just difficult, right? It's the NIL era. We always talk about this. And so they were able to bring in, like you said, a lot of good talent. And I think that's at least something you can try to lean on. They have a pretty identifiable style with how they want to play under Jordan Mincy. And so you kind of know what you're getting with Jacksonville. And I feel like it is one where, from that standpoint, at least that is something that maybe, not necessarily you're going to be fully confident in them being able to flip this and go 20-12, but you do know what the style is. And now it's really just a matter of seeing if these players they brought in can help them kind of establish that a bit more and be able to get some of these games, that aren't kind of like grinded out type styles, right? I mean, they're playing games 62-60, 68-49, 67-62. Like, can you win some of these games that maybe you are going to have to score a little bit more? Because like we said, there's a league that's got a lot of bad defensive teams just from an efficiency standpoint. So I think that is going to be kind of the interesting thing to see how it develops there. But yeah, can they get back on track? We're going to find out.
Yep, we certainly are going to. And then I feel like there's been one clear disappointment in the conference over the last few seasons. Florida Gulf Coast on paper always looks like one of the best teams in the conference, and Pat Chambers just has not put it together over the last few seasons. They're going to have the most size in the conference, in my opinion. You've got Tristan Goulet, who comes back after he was relatively glued to the bench, right around about 6'10" or so. Justin Hauser is a 7-footer that comes in from Penn State. They're looking to California University, and that is not out here on the West Coast. That is actually in Pennsylvania. Really nice Division II player that was able to average about 17 points, 9 rebounds per game. And our nation's first president is on the roster, George Washington III. So that makes things very interesting. Want to get your thoughts on Florida Gulf Coast because on paper, they should dominate every single team in the post in this conference, but it just feels like Pat Chambers hasn't put it together.
Yeah, this was not a very big team last year, but this year that should be the separator. Like, they should be able to use their size and, push people around, be physical, and win the battle on the glass, win, the game 5 feet and in at the rim. Like, that's how they should be able to win, just based on pretty good, size compared to most teams in this conference. But like you said, you also have to look back at, can they really do it? And can they be consistent enough to do it? It's really been up and down. They've not bottomed out like some of these other teams have in this conference over the past several years. They've stayed, kind of in that middle tier at times, or made that push a couple years ago where they went 13-5 in the conference. But other than that, that consistency just hasn't been there. And I think that's something that's still going to make you a little bit hesitant when it comes to, even with only 8 teams in this conference, trying to definitively say, hey, this is a team you got to watch out for. Like, I don't know if you can completely say that, but they do have some good talent coming in. Like you said, it's a team that's kind of been revamped with size. And so at least that's sort of a fascinating story to watch, even in the first month of the season, as they play teams that are going to be pretty big on their non-conference schedule, probably a couple of those games, the bye game types. I mean, can they handle that? And if they can, well, then that would give you a little bit more confidence, again, using that sort of ability with your height and such heading into ASUN play. Another team that I can't say I have a great read on, and it's only because we've just not seen that consistency so far in the Pat Chambers era.
No question about it, as we do have Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And then I think this team is very interesting because they finally broke through, made the NCAA tournament last year under Grant Leonard, a guy that loves himself a very nice, ugly sweater. For Queens NC, great offense, top 35 team in terms of points per possession overall, and second in terms of points per possession specifically in home games. So they were great there. They bring back a few guys from last year's team that made the NCAA tournament, Jordan Watford, Avante Parker, a pair of guys that had a double-figure amount of points, but they do lose a lot of guys. They're really not bringing in a lot of transfers, and just like it feels like we've been talking about with every team in this conference, defense still not good for Queens NC.
Yeah, and I think that's where, you are banking on with them. It's going to be about the offense, and can all these guys that you are going to be able to bring back, whether that's a Jordan Watford, as you mentioned, he goes from 12 points. Can he now be a 15 to 17 point per game type guy? That's a big story, I think, to watch, and certainly they have some of these other guys coming back. Parker also averaged 11 points a game. Can he be someone that also takes a bit of a step forward? You look at that role he's going to play as kind of the 6'9" guy in the front court. And so I think that's really one of those where you look at just the development aspect of some of these guys. I think that's going to be a big thing to watch, just knowing, at least on paper, those are two guys that were able to average double figures last year. And there are not a lot of others in this conference we've been able to say that about so far. And so even if their defense kind of is certainly on the same level as a lot of these other teams we've mentioned, in some categories even worse probably than some of these teams, still their offensive capabilities have given them, kind of that potential advantage. And, we saw that play out in the ASUN tournament, where they're just all of a sudden just going on a tear and scoring a lot of points, scoring 90 and 98 respectively in those final two games to get to the NCAA tournament. And, yes, they gave up 104 to Purdue, and, the defense ultimately is kind of their undoing against teams like that. But I think in this conference, at least, let's remember, too, you mentioned, this team has started 7-0 in the conference last year, really built on their offense. And so I am fascinated to see if they can keep that going despite losing, quite a few guys. But still, can they take a couple that they have back, bring some of these other guys forward, and, have brought in some talent as well. So based on what Grant Leonard's been able to do so far, they are a team I would certainly have on the higher end of this conference, just because we saw what they could do with it last year. There are some things that I think, just in terms of how they play, that allow them to separate themselves a little bit.
Yep, I'm right there with you. And then we've got one last team to take a look at. We go to your neck of the woods, the Lipscomb Bisons out there in Nashville. I remember I used to do some high school broadcasts for Lipscomb Academy, so always warms my heart there, and warms my heart that Kevin Carroll, and your number one, made a nice transition from the Division II ranks. Team wins 19 games, and what I think is the kicker here, because we talk about these bad defenses, you return Mateo Esmeraldo, 7 assists per game at the point guard spot. If you ask me, he's the best returning guard in this conference. You've got a few other mix and match guys. Titus Sagarius, hopefully I got that correct, was averaging about 10 points per game. Kennedy Akpara as well. They're going to be bringing in a few transfers as well. Maybe not guys that are going to be completely knocking off your socks or anything like that, but Truman Byrne, he should be able to give you a bit of something, has a bit of familiarity coming in from Central Arkansas. And I know that with Lipscomb, it is a bunch that, maybe you're not bringing in a lot of sizzle in the transfer portal, but I think bringing back Esmeraldo, that great point guard in a conference where there's not really a lot of defense being played, that puts Lipscomb, in my opinion, right towards the top of this conference.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think, like you said, you sort of have the confidence, too, in what Kevin Carroll was able to do last year. And you knew, again, there were going to be a lot of those things.
And unlike the other teams, they played a lick of defense.
Right. Hey, they finished in the top 200. That's basically top 5 in the nation. If you look at it comparing to the other teams in the conference, they forced turnovers. And that's something else, too, when you really look at it. Not a lot of teams in this conference able to force a lot of turnovers defensively. And so that can be something where you have a good offensive team, plays at a fast pace, they're going to get extra possessions because they do force turnovers. And so I think that's going to be a theme. Can they keep that going this year? Again, I think that's a pretty fascinating story to watch with them there. And like you said, it's a team that's going to take a lot of threes. They have the point guard play, and certainly I think they've kind of built a roster that does mesh well with the style that they want to keep playing. And so, yeah, to me, Lipscomb is probably that team right now that you're looking at and feeling pretty confident, knowing that, top 2 teams in this league have exited from last year in Central Arkansas and Austin Peay. And so right now, I think, you are probably looking at Lipscomb having a great chance to be right there to compete for this league title. And I think a lot of that just has to do with really that Lipscomb style and the way they've kind of just been able to implement their style of play over the past little bit. And Kevin Carroll able to do that in year one, and I think they'll have a chance to do that again here in year two.
And an underrated kicker as well. With all those teams that departed, now you've got most of your schools out there in the state of Florida having to travel from Florida to Tennessee. That should be helping out Lipscomb a little bit as well. And a man that always helps out on this podcast, a man that lends great insights, that'd be you, Blake. You're doing a tremendous job over at Southeastern 16. Obviously taking a look at the SEC, but so much more here in the offseason. So let the good people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, I always appreciate it, Greg. Yeah, check us out over there, Southeastern 16, for all our SEC stuff. You can find us on YouTube and everything else college basketball related. Follow me on Twitter /X at the Blake Lovell.
And Blake doing an incredible job looking at the sport that we all know and love of college basketball, and every single time he joins me, lends such great insight. So big thanks to Blake for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. This is the Atlantic Sun Conference Preview Edition, so coming in next, I give you my projector or finish for the Atlantic Sun. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It's always a pleasure to be able to get Blake Lovell aboard. He does amazing work over at Southeastern 16, looking at this great game of college basketball, but on top of covering the SEC, he does a great job looking at all 365, now 366 Division I teams, with our newest friend, West Florida, joining this Atlantic Sun every single time Blake joins me, and he has joined me, like I said, at the very minimum for 6 years on this Atlantic Sun Conference Preview Edition, might be 7 or 8 years. Every single time he does so, he lends such great insights. So big thanks to Blake for joining me in last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast to give you my projector or finish for the Atlantic Sun, and as per usual, since I'm doing a conference preview today, any news and notes that we saw in college basketball on Thursday, I'm going to summarize them on the podcast tomorrow. I want to give as much sparkle and shine to these conference previews as much as humanly possible, whether you're listening in June, July, August, September, October. Want to make sure that these are standalone, evergreen podcasts that you can utilize to get set for the upcoming season. So how about if we dive in? Dead last in my projector or finish, we are going to be going with West Florida, and they were solid at the Division II level. They were 25-9. They were averaging about 85 points per game, and for West Florida, they were shooting about 38.5% from three-point range, but you have to have a lot of question mark because they lose so many of their top scorers from a season ago. They're going to be looking to build around a few of those ancillary guys, like off the bench, they were able to get about 5 points, 3 rebounds per game out of Christian Moore, and something that I noticed with a lot of these teams, that they go from the Division II ranks on up to the Division I level, they're just not able to match the physicality and the overall size they typically get at the Division I level. I think that is going to be a massive issue for them here in the early going, and just moving forward, they're going to be building a lot around 6'7" combo player Tim Hall Jr. For Hall, he was last year averaging about 10 points, 8 boards, 1.3 steals per contest, and Julius J. King, he was averaging about 7.5 points per game off the bench as well. But other than Hall, you really don't return any of your starters from the season ago. They don't bring in any guys from the Division I ranks as transfers as well. They're going to be looking to someone like a Christian Velazero, who is coming over from Gulf Coast State to be able to help out with regards to the point guard duties and the overall offense. Just nobody above 6'7" on the roster. I think it's going to be a rough season for our good friends over at West Florida. I've got the Argonauts and number 8 in terms of my projected or finish. At number 7, we say out there in the great state of Florida, it's North Florida. 364th out of 365 Division I teams in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Now, good news for North Florida, they do bring back quite a bit from a season ago, and it was a little bit of a year of transition last year for North Florida, because last season, for the first time in a long time, they no longer had Coach Driscoll on the sidelines, Bobby Keenan. He was in year number 1, sort of in an interim role. Now he's got the job full-time, even though they went only 7-25 last year, 5-13 within the conference, and he was able to maintain some of those guys from a season ago. Kent Jackson, he was averaging 15 points, 2.2 assists, shot 35% from 3. BJ Plummer, he was able to give the team about 8 points, 3.5 rebounds per game. And Elijah Elliott, coming over from New Mexico State, where he had 8.5 points, 2.5 assists per game. He is a guy that has been in college basketball for a really, really long time. There's some upside there, but I mean, they just play no defense whatsoever. Second to worst in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. 359th in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis on defense. One of the absolute worst rebounding teams in all of college basketball as well. I failed to mention it in segment number 1. I'm going to mention it right now. In terms of the trends that you find in this conference, there's a lot of second and third chances to be had by these teams, because for North Florida, 340th in terms of offensive rebound percentage, they got completely bludgeoned there, and then they allow a whole bunch of second and third chances as well. In terms of percentage of opponents' missed shots, that result in an offensive rebound, 360th last year. They allowed teams to grab 36.4% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound, went to 39.1% last season. I just don't know how you get a very good result with this team. So as a result, with North Florida, deficit of the doubt, I've got them number 7. In terms of my projector finish, number 6, I go with Stetson. They've got a lot of the similar issues that I just told you with North Florida, 288th in the country last season in terms of defensive rebound percentage. Now for Stetson, they've got a little bit more defense, but still, once again, team that was well outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. I do like the fact that they bring back their top rebounder, though, in Colin Cole. For Cole last season, 13.6 half rebounds per game. I know that they were dealing with a few ailments last season, so that did throw off things a little bit. And bringing back Alec Oglesby, who he spent 2 seasons over at Stetson, and then he was playing over at Middle Tennessee last season. He's back after a few seasons ago when he was with Stetson, 8.5 points, shot 41% from 3-point range. He's a nice sharpshooter. Diego Skotsky, he's able to give you about 2.3 assists per game, shot 44% from 3-point range over at Florida National last year. That's a relatively good ad for them. And then Alex Doyle off the bench was shooting about 40% from 3, and this is a team that was 346th in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis last year. Again, I just don't know where the rebounding is going to be. Daniel McGregor, he was able to give the team about 4 boards and a steal per game off the bench. That should be able to help out a little bit. And then 6'10", Finley Sheridan, he was able to average about 4 points, and he did shoot 42% from 3. Good versatility with Stetson. I think that they're going to get absolutely bludgeoned down low. Again, where's the defense going to be coming from? We've seen this Donnie Jones system in the past. I just don't see it here. So I set them at number 6 in terms of my projector finish. And number 5, I'm going with Florida Gulf Coast. And in terms of the roster makeup itself, Florida Gulf Coast probably should be like a top 3, top 4 team. They bring in a really good player from the Division II ranks in Bryson Lucas, 17 points, 9.8 rebounds per game from California University, which is actually based off there in the state of Pennsylvania. Tristan Goulet, he was a guy that was glued to the bench last season, but at 6'10", he should be one of the better low post pieces in all of college basketball. And George Washington III, he played in just 14 games last season. He's a former top 250 recruit from Michigan, and he should help out a team that was actually surprisingly decent on the glass. They were 47th in the country last year in terms of defensive rebound percentage. They started out the year good with their 3-point shooting, really weighing towards back half of the season, and they bring in Justin Hauser. He was over at Penn State last season, 7-footer that really couldn't get out there on the floor. So if you're looking at top low post presence in this conference, I mean, this Florida Gulf Coast team, they've got a whole heck of a lot of that. What are you going to be able to get out of the guards? They're going to be rolling the dice on Elijah Brooks, who was limited to just 8 games last season over at Houston Christian. And for Brooks, he was also a nice go-to scorer when he was over at North Dakota a few seasons ago. If you can get back to that guy that he was about 2 seasons ago prior to all the injury issues, like he was actually very rock solid over at Houston Christian. So, I mean, there is a little bit of upside there, but how is he going to be able to come in off that injury? And I just have found that Pat Chambers, he just year in and year out does less with more as well. So I've got big time question marks with this Florida Gulf Coast team. I think that they've got the talent to be a top 3 team in this conference, but with what they've done the last few seasons, I've got to put Florida Gulf Coast at number 5 in terms of my projector finish. Number 4, I'm going with Jacksonville. Jacksonville has actually had a nice haul here in the transfer portal. They bring in from within the conference Jamie Phillips. And for Jamie Phillips, he was one of those guys that dealt with a lot of injuries last season, but I mean, this is a guy that was absolutely explosive when he was out there on the floor for Stetson. In his 17 games, 16 points, 5.5 boards, shot 35% from 3-point range, and you get good Wood with Hayden Wood back. He was one of the main men for Jacksonville last year. 12 points on 37.5% 3-point shooting, 6'4", a little bit of an undersized wing, so that's nice. And for Jacksonville, this is a team that they prioritize defense and slow play under Jordan Mincy. They were last year a team that was well outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game. But again, they played slow, but they didn't play good defense. 319th in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They bring in Caleb Williams, no, not the Bears quarterback, guy over at Lafayette who had 15.5 points, 3 assists per contest, and then Jane Newell, he was on Georgia's bench the last few seasons at 6'8", should be able to be a nice mixer and shaker, and they do a nice job bringing in a guy, Namia Turner, about 8.5 points, 4 boards, block per contest over at Central Arkansas last season. But man, I just continue to have question marks with this team. James Morrow comes over from South Carolina State. He was able to get that team about 8 points per game. Just hasn't happened for Mincy's teams just yet. I think that they're going to be just not knowing their personnel, play a little bit more slowly than how this team should. I think that they're going to continue to have some difficulties with regards to their three-point shooting, offense, and defense with Jacksonville. Even though they made some nice additions, I've got them at number 4 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 3, going to go with Bellarmine. Now, for Bellarmine, great offense, 21st in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. One of the best teams in terms of being able to get the ball inside as well. They were really good with their 2-point shooting percentage. They took quite a few threes, but they still did a nice job in terms of mixing it up, and they returned quite a few pieces. Keenan Gooding, he was able to give the team 11.5 points, 2.1 assists per game, shot 42% from 3 last season, and I mean, you've got Sam Donald, the guy that's able to give you about 6.5 points per game. Love what he's able to bring to the table as well. Tucker Tomata, he was able to shoot about 36% from 3. Jacob Walsler, he was able to give the team about 3.5 points per game. Now, they need to do a better job in terms of guarding New York. Team shot 40.4% from three-point range against them. 364th out of 365 Division I teams. They were a hearty 365th out of 365 Division I teams in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Do think that's going to be a little bit better here. The Davenport system, I think, is going to be able to play itself quite well because you had the passing of the torch. It used to be Scott Davenport, who was the coach of this team. Now it's going to be Mr. Doug Davenport, who is in now year number 2 of the system. So you sort of know what you're going to be able to expect out of Bellarmine. They're going to be playing slow. They do a nice job executing on offense. They don't do such a great job on defense, but I think that the younger Davenport with a year under his belt, having a lot of guys back from a season ago, I recognize that you lose your top scorer in Jack Kaczynski. I do think that there's upside here, and we saw Bellarmine improve as the season went along. So I've got number 3 in my projector or finish as Bellarmine. Number 2, going to go with Queens NC. They represented in the NCAA tournament a season ago, and I really just love what Grant Leonard is able to bring to the table in general. 31st in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis on offense last year. That was actually number 2 in specifically their home games, but again, bottom 25 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They do bring back 2 key guys from a season ago. Jordan Watford, about 12 points, 4 assists, shot 37.5% from 3. Avante Parker, he was at about 6'8", 6'9", able to pop it a little bit from 3. A block and a half, 5.5 rebounds, 11 points per game. Dante Kears, he was able to shoot about 41.5% from 3-point range as well, but now you're going to be looking to Joshua, I hope I get this last name correct, Johan Huron, who he was able to average about 8.7 rebounds per game at the junior college level at North Platte. They just really haven't brought in a lot of guys to elevate. They are going to be losing quite a few pieces, like a Yov Berman from a season ago as well. Very undersized team. Outside of Avante Parker, really nobody is above 6'8". Among guys with Division I experience, he's like the only guy that's above 6'5" that has any Division I experience, and that's why I just can't put them number 1 in my projector or finish. I've got Queens at number 2, and then with Lipscomb, I've got the Bison at number 1 in my projector or finish, mainly because I think that they've got the best point guard in this conference, Mateo Esmeraldo. He's one of the few guys that returns from a season ago, but for Esmeraldo, he did a really good job in terms of stepping up, taking ownership of this offense, as he might not be the most explosive scorer in the world, but still, 10 points per game, 7 assists per contest. That's a top 15 mark in all of college basketball. Shot 37% from 3-point range. He is going to be the man in this conference. Personally, I think that there's a good chance that he might be the preseason player of the year in this conference. The team was 279th in terms of rebound percentage. You're going to need to work on that, but Truman Byrne, who was at Central Arkansas last year at 6'10", he was able to give that team a trio of boards, pair of assists, shot 34.5% from 3-point range. He's going to be a big part of that. And then you got Titus Sagunas, who last season he was with the Lipscomb Bison, averaging 9.5 points, shot 34% from 3. He's back, and then I do think that bringing back Kennedy Apara was able to average 5 points per game as a freshman off the bench. I think that he takes a nice year 1 to year 2 bump. And then you've got Nazi, hopefully I got that correct. He was able to give the team about 3 rebounds per game as a 6'5" wing as well. For Lipscomb, maybe they didn't make a whole bunch of crazy additions in the transfer portal or anything like that, but they did a nice job in terms of maintaining quite a few of their own. They improved a little bit down low with regards to the posts. I do think that some of these freshmen like a Sawyer Dodson are going to be able to make some additions right away, and those freshmen, they're going to need to do a good job down low. I think that they're going to do just enough for this team to be a formidable force and take the Atlantic Sun. And you're number one of having just 8 members. So Lipscomb, my number one team in my projector finish. And that will wrap things up for the Atlantic Sun Conference Preview edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Big thanks to Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16. He joined me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, do have one of 2 ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way, that is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, trying to get you guys set for what is going to be the greatest college basketball season ever. Here in the offseason, looking at all the news, notes, and happenings in this offseason. Going to continue to be joined by great guests on the podcast all throughout the offseason. So that way, once we get in season, we can make this as profitable as humanly possible. And once we get back in season, picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.